Hey, what's up guys? So a few weeks back down in Florida, we had a big laser jammer testing shootout. Basically had a bunch of different laser jammers to test and compare and figure out which ones can jam best. We had everything from the ALP, the Escort Redline Ci 360C's new VX shifters. We've got the Uniden R9 jammers. We've got the Stinger fiber optic jammers. We've got the TMG Alpha-17, the Adaptiv TPX heads, like a lot of different systems. On the first day of testing, we had all the systems installed onto one vehicle to do a direct head-to-head comparison. And then on the second day, we had a lot of people come by with systems installed on their own personal vehicles, which obviously gave us a lot more data points. Plus, we could see what it's like with these systems installed on other vehicles and with other placement options, which obviously would change things too. Now, the test results from the first test, the head-to-head comparison, have now been posted online. And I'll link to the test results for you down underneath the like button. And in this video, we're going to review the results, as well as some of the additional details and context that you need to know about, including some of the things that don't necessarily show up in the test results, but I think are actually really important and good to know. And then afterwards, once the results come out for all of people's individual cars, we'll do another video on that. And then after I have all the systems installed on my own personal vehicle, then I plan on doing some similar head-to-head comparison on my Audi as well. And then of course, I'd like to do a video that goes over all the systems and how they compare, not just the test results, which is what we're going to be focusing here in this first video, but also everything else in terms of UI, features that are available, firmware updates, customer support, all that kind of stuff that you would need to know about too. So in this video, let's go ahead and dive into the test results from this first round of head-to-head testing with all of the very best laser jammers currently available on the market. Now, starting out, a special shout out to the Bravo. He was the one who helped to organize this event here down in Florida. The testing that we did was on his Honda Odyssey. And then he was the one who also helped to put all these results together and post them on the forum as well. There were a ton of amazing people at this event. Ragged Edge, Squirrel Master, Nor'easter 18, a ton of really awesome people. And a big thank you to everybody who came by. It was a great event. It was awesome seeing all you guys. And with that said, let's go ahead and dive into these test results here. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of different systems here to test. We had everything from an ALP with like both the regular and TX heads, actually two TX heads on the front, though they were not the TX black heads. I'll get to that in just a minute. The newer TX heads, they're actually older regular heads and the older blue and green TX heads. We also had the Escort Redline Ci 360C. We actually had two different Redline Ci's on his car. The first one had some issues. I'll get to that in a minute too. We had the Uniden R9, 6 heads, 3 in the front, and then 3 in the rear. With TMGs, we tested with 2 regular heads, the Gen 4 heads, and 1 VPR head in the center. And they also did a test here with just 3 regular heads up front. With the Adaptiv TPX, they tested it with 2 regular and 1 CM head. In the rear, there was 1 regular and 1 CM as well. And they also tried it with like 2 CM heads in the rear instead of just like 1 and 1. And then with the Stinger, we had a set of triples as well. So 3 front receive heads and 3 front transmit heads. And then as far as the test car itself, this was on his Honda Odyssey. We had a bunch of systems, as I mentioned, installed in his grill. It was kind of wild seeing everything installed here. As far as the guns themselves, we had a ton of different police laser guns. We did some focus on like a couple different variants of the different Dragon Eye guns, Laser Allies, LTI True Speed SXB, the True Speed LR, regular True Speed, Stalker XLR, and the PL4, as well as the Pro Light Plus. The test course itself was really nice. It was down in South Florida, so we had these really nice long straightaways in either direction. And it would give us plenty of time for the car to drive towards the shooters and target the front of the vehicles. And then after it would pass by, we also had the ability to target the rear of the vehicle as well to do that rear jamming testing. And getting into the test results now, we're going to first start here with the ALP. So the front of the ALP had 2 regular heads here in blue, and then the 2 TX heads down here lower in the grill. So actually 2 TX heads, not 1. The rear of the vehicle had 2 regular heads like this and then 1 TX head in the rear. There was also a firmware update that was released just before this test that helped address some of the punch-throughs that we've been seeing if people were using the blue and green TX heads. That wasn't an issue that plagued the newer black TX head. So this was with the updated firmware from ALP. And as far as the test results, he's got some commentary here that you can check out. He mentioned that the performance did seem improved compared to how he was testing the last time, but the rear does have a few weak spots, especially down low on the reflectors on the bumpers, like right down here. That is pretty far away from the heads themselves. Most of the time they're going to be targeting like, the rear plate and rear tail light area or so, but he does have some weaknesses down there. And in fact, he mentioned that all of the punch throughs that he found were on the edges or extreme corners. It's not very likely in the real world with like a normal shot. And he's also mentioned that like most all the systems he's tested also struggle with down there. But again, in the real world, you're going to be seeing shots like here and here. Either way, if we start getting into the test results, the ALP did pretty well overall, but it did have a couple issues. You can see the ones here in green are going to be jammed to gun or jammed from gun, basically no reading available at all. If he did have any punch throughs, most of them tended to be a pretty close range, like 200 to 300 feet or so. Sometimes they would get like a second punch through if he was driving away, so like one around 300 feet, another one up at 600 feet. Same thing here, passenger taillight. There's another one at like 900 feet. Some of the issues we mentioned before. And same idea here, like 500 feet, 800 feet, taillight, 700 feet. But the front was nice and solid. I think the only punch through that he had in the front was like 303 feet. Right there. So again, almost completely solid on the front, just a couple rear punch throughs. There were also some questions about testing with like the TX black heads to give, results with how the newer heads could perform. And the Bravo mentioned that he didn't have any at the event since he doesn't own any. And so he's actually wanting to maybe redo some of the testing with the TX blackheads. He also needs to retest some of the TPX stuff, which we'll get into here in just a second. And BRD has mentioned that with the TX blackheads, the diode head configuration is a little bit different. And so the TX blacks should actually perform better. But again, these are like 5-year-old TX heads. So I guess it's good to get some data points on like older TXs as well. It's also worth pointing out the fact that the ALP was running with 4 heads up front, while the other systems that we tested were running with just 3 heads up front. Moving on, next we're going to talk about the Escort Redline Ci 360C. For this setup here, we tried 2 different configurations. The first system that we got from Escort, it actually had the wrong number of heads in the box. It had 4 transceivers, kind of the receivers and transmitters, and only 1 transmitter head, or like the TX head. That's not correct because it should actually have 3 kind of regular heads and 2 transmitters, and so it's kind of lacking one of the TX heads in a sense. Additionally, we also had some issues with the system getting shot with a Dragon Eye gun and getting stuck actually, and it would keep trying to jam long after the shooter stopped shooting the system. It could also lead to some instant punch throughs as well. Now, luckily we had an Escort rep here on site. A bunch of manufacturers actually showed up for this, and they were able to like help us troubleshoot some of these issues and kind of figure out what was going on, and they wound up actually sending out a replacement system so that they can go ahead and do some more testing. The additional testing was done after I finished and left the event, and luckily with the second system that they sent us, it had the correct head count, and so it had a full set of sensors with 4 transceivers and 2 transmitters. So exactly what we would expect for both front and rear protection. Now, the Bravo mentioned that due to the system being replaced, the testing was accomplished at a later date, like I mentioned earlier, and he did have to substitute some of the guns with what he had on hand, since a lot of the people actually took their guns home after the test. Nevertheless, if you take a look at these test results, the system actually did really well here. There's a lot of green and just a few punch throughs here in yellow. The punch throughs that they saw were like, what, 570 feet, 416, 478, 321. There was a few in like the 100-foot range, so there were some punch throughs, but the system did a good job of jamming almost all the way to the gun, and this applies both front and rear. And as far as those close range punch throughs, around 200 feet or so, he said he was starting to pan the gun. And again, kind of doing the thing where he's like starting to target different areas of the car as it starts getting closer. And it can get outside of the transmit angle of the diodes. And so the punch throughs could actually likely disappear if he was kind of more on axis. Again, that's not the type of stuff that you'll see in the real world. So in practice, these kind of results are great. Now, for the second day of testing, we also had a lot of other systems coming up. Like we had people with ALPs with like the TX Blacks. So we'll be able to, like in the next video, go over test results with other head configurations and whatnot. We also had some other people with like the Escort system installed too. We had one guy with like the Redline Ci installed on his BMW. It didn't do quite as well on that car due to some of the limitations with the head placements and kind of limitations in the BMW grille. I'll get into more of that kind of stuff. So again, your results can certainly vary depending on what car you're installing. The capabilities of the system, some jammers seem to do better than others on other cars. But again, for this test specifically, we're trying to keep things pretty apples to apples and have like everything installed on one vehicle, kind of the same vehicle, and see how well it can fare. Either way though, these new laser jammers that Escort's got with the Redline Ci seem to be much better than what we've had with the previous gen jammers like the Shifter Max on the Max Ci, for example. Moving on, next we've got these Stinger fiber jammers. These are the super teeny tiny kind of like fiber optic laser jammers that are much smaller than a traditional head. Now, in previous testing, we've had some issues actually getting the heads installed in the grill and ensuring that they're actually mounted straight and level. it can be tough to eyeball, especially for like temporary installs and with such tiny heads. And so for that reason, Squirrel Master actually 3D printed these head mounts. They're the size of an ALP head, but they've got these little holes here so that you can actually insert the Stinger fibers. And here's one of them actually where you can see he's got the heads inserted. It's got both a transmit head and a receive head. In fact, there's a couple different slots here so that you can mount them with different angles. We wound up mounting it with like an 8-degree up tilt on the head. Stinger recommends installing them anywhere from like 0 to 10 degrees or so, kind of in that range, maybe 5 or 10 up. I forget, I'd have to double check. But the idea is you kind of mount them a little bit up, not down, because you just basically want to avoid any reflections off the ground. And so we actually use these to help with installing them on the car. And so for that reason, we were able to install these fibers here in like the exact same locations that we had with some of the other laser jammers. Now, in an ideal situation, you would maybe want to mount the heads closer to the target areas like your headlights. And in fact, that's actually what Stinger recommends in all their documentation. However, even after an hour of attempts, we weren't able to find a good spot to install them there and ensure that they were still straight and level. We've got a photo here of those head mounts, and yeah, 5 to 10 degrees is what Stinger had mentioned here. And we tested with the 8-degree configuration. But let's take a look at how it performed in this configuration. Getting in, as you can see, we actually had a fair number of punch throughs here. They were like 500-600 feet or so. Some of them as far as like 1,300 feet, 860 feet. Now, in the past, Stinger systems have actually been pretty capable, but we're actually seeing a number of punch throughs here. Now, something that I noticed is if you take a closer look, for the center mass, it actually does really well. It goes jam to gun for like most of these results. So front center mass, maybe 100 foot or so. Up here, we've got another jam to gun, a close range punch through 300 feet. Overall, the center mass does well. If you take a look at all the punch throughs, they tend to be like the headlight area, driver headlight, passenger headlight. Same thing here, passenger headlight, passenger and driver headlight. And so this actually leads me to wonder, like, is there an issue with the placement of the heads themselves on the car? You see with the Stinger heads, I believe they've actually reduced the receive sensitivity to help maybe avoid some issues with reflections and whatnot. And so for that reason, they want to really ensure that the heads are as close as possible to the target areas like the headlights, for example. And with the heads being so tiny, you can install them in like panel gaps or right by the heads or the headlights to get them like super close to the target area. And if you take a look at the photo, we had them installed over here. Again, ideally, maybe you would install them like right along there or maybe right in these like panel gaps or something. You can get them super close. And I do think that with the heads installed a little bit closer to the headlights, the system should perform better. So I know there are punch throughs here in the results, but I think that with a better installed system, it would be more capable. And when I get the system installed in my Audi, I'm going to make a point to like not cluster the Stinger heads with the other laser jammers because they're so small. I want to try installing them like really close to the headlights and give them kind of like the best capability possible. So more testing to come with that, but definitely something interesting that we learned here with this test. And speaking of testings, the Stinger also has this feature which is kind of annoying actually, where you can put it into like a test mode where you can go and get jamming capabilities, but then it has like a 1-minute cooldown afterwards. So you have to like stop and wait for the system to like cool down, and then you can reactivate the test mode and stuff. And so with some of these extra annoying delays that they've built in, it really limited their ability to like try moving the heads and put them in different spots to see if they can get better jamming capabilities. And so as always, this is just one test with one set of jammers on one car with one, placement and everything. More testing is needed. I think these systems show a lot of promise, especially with what we're seeing with like the center mass stuff. And I think that with moving the outer heads closer to the headlights, that should definitely be helpful here with the Stingers. Moving on, let's next take a look at the TMG Alpha-17. Now, first starting here with the front configuration with like 2 regular heads as well as 1 VPR head. We had the heads installed here in these standard locations, so 2 regular and 1 TX, kind of in like your V shape like that. And going into the results, we had some issues here with the TMG. So against some of the easier guns like the TrueSpeed LR, the Custom Pro Laser 4, and even the Stalker XLR, which is a medium difficulty gun, it actually did great. It went jam to gun here. We did see an issue here with the TrueSpeed S XB, which is a little bit concerning. I know they've actually done some work with their TrueSpeed S algorithm. They've also done some testing here with some of the other copies of the TrueSpeed S. They were able to replicate it, but it looks like there's some issue going on here with the TrueSpeed S that hopefully they're able to address in a future firmware update. I believe they're working on that, but we'll have to see. Now, moving on to the Dragon Eyes, it is capable. You can see it definitely did some jam to gun runs here. This orange one, this was actually an issue due to potential punch through. They said that for this one, they got a punch through when there was another vehicle driving in the opposite direction near the test vehicle. The punch through was not repeatable on runs without the oncoming car and was likely due to reflection. So that does look bad there, but it should be better without that reflection issue. Now, these red ones here, looks like it's actually a a jamming algorithm issue. You see, that was actually like an older laser ally, and with some of the laser allies, the TMG can actually struggle with deciding which algorithm it should use, like a laser ally algorithm or one of the Dragon Eye algorithms. And the system would either jam the gun, but throw a jam code the whole time, or it would be basically instant punch through the entire way. There were also some inconsistencies as far as like if the VPR head would fire or not, so again, it really looks like it's confusion from the TMG side as far as which algorithm it should use to jam these guns. And so despite the kind of ugly colors here on the test chart, overall the configuration performed pretty well, and the punch throughs that they got were on like some of the edges and lower corners as well. You do have to be careful about like VPR placement and whatnot, and alignment, just to make sure it's not angled down too low, or the system they found can get stuck in a loop when hit with the Dragon Eye, where it gets blinded by like reflections off the ground. So again, with a lot of these systems, we're finding like they need to be mounted straight and level, or sometimes, depending on what the manufacturer recommends, a little bit of an up tilt to help avoid some of those potential reflection issues off of the ground. Next, they did a test here with just 3 regular Gen 4 heads. So the center head was a regular head and not a VPR head. And it looks like, again, they had similar issues here with that older laser ally gun. With some of the Dragon Eye speed lidars, who got either jammed a gun or like punch through down to like 100 feet, which is great. One of the Dragon Eye compacts they tested with, again, punch throughs only around 200 feet. Some of the compacts, like 200 to 400 feet. True Speed S, they had some jam to gun runs here. So again, the system can be very capable. And it's helpful to keep in mind too that this is also a more affordable system than like some of the other ones that we've talked about before. So if you're looking for something inexpensive, again, it's not perfect. None of these are like totally perfect or something, but this one does seem to be pretty capable here in practice. We're hoping for some additional firmware updates to improve things like the True Speed S jamming capability, and then also maybe this confusion with some of the laser ally guns. But again, it does seem to be pretty capable otherwise. Next, we've got the Adaptiv TPX system. They ran 2 different configurations. The first configuration that they tried was with 2 regular heads like this, and then the center mass head here in the middle. And then in the back, you can only do 2 heads on the back, so they've got 2 heads, not 3, so 1 regular and 1 center mass head. Now, getting into the results here, this is going to look pretty ugly. There were actually some issues that they ran into with the Adaptiv system, which is they were trying to sort this stuff out, and it was actually the reason why getting these results published, well, it was actually delayed for a while. They were trying to sort some of this stuff out, and they're still working on addressing these issues, which I'll get into here. But let's go ahead and take a look at how the system tested here, and then talk about like what they're doing about it. If we start first with the front heads, so like headlight, and headlight, or center mass here, most of them are actually going to be around 200 feet or so. So it does better than the test chart looks here. Most of the punch throughs that you see, like taillight, rear center mass, taillight, those are the ones where we start getting longer distance punch throughs with the rear. So it does better in the front than it does in the rear. But yes, we are seeing more punch throughs here on the rear. Moving on to some of the other guns, looks like we had a passenger taillight, another rear shot punch through here of 1100 feet, but otherwise jammed until that point. Kind of jam to gun, jam from gun otherwise. It did well here against the True Speed S, or sorry, the True Speed. The True Speed S itself, they had some punch throughs, which is a little bit concerning here. Not a Dragon Eye, but yes, some punch throughs, passenger taillight. Oh, and driver headlight on the front. Looks like they had some punch throughs here as well. Another inexpensive system, but yeah, there's the results on that. Now, as far as some additional context, the Bravo's been working with Adaptiv to kind of figure out what's going on. He had some confusion about like the firmware update and being able to verify whether or not it updated correctly. It seems like it updated, it was really fast, so maybe there was an issue with getting the system updating properly. And so for that reason, he's not fully confident whether or not the firmware was actually loaded. He's also got a mix of older and newer center mass and regular heads, which should work nicely side by side, but it's possible that maybe that wasn't the case. Either way though, he's saying that the rear gives minimal resistance on Dragon Eye and doesn't seem to hold up long enough to give you enough time to like drop the speed before the gun can punch through. Some of the punch throughs are lower corners, which is harder to cover on the car, but again, it should do a better job, on like the license plate or taillight area. Now, as far as other stuff they tested, they also tried a configuration with 3 regular heads in the front and then 2 center mass heads. So the idea is you can actually do all 5 center mass heads if you want. They can both transmit and receive. So it's kind of like having, ALP's TX heads or TMG's VPR heads, but doing it for all of the different jammers or all the different heads. In theory, it should perform better, and so he was actually really curious to go try it. So for the front, he took off the center mass head and actually moved it to the rear. So the rear now had 2 center mass heads and then just 3 regular heads here on the front. Unfortunately, though, he definitely still had issues in this configuration. You can see like passenger taillight, Dragon Eye, it's like boom, 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 still getting a series of punch throughs. Dragon Eye speed lidar, rear center mass, like boom, 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 boom. Again, 2 heads still, not 3. That's not really the strong suit here of the Adaptiv system. But even like the headlight, we're still getting some punch throughs. What is this? 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet, 200, 100, 600 feet against the Dragon Eye Compact. That's with without the center mass head, just the 3 regular heads. Against True Speed S, so front 196, 455 driver headlight, and then tail light was jam from gun, and then a series of punch throughs on the True Speed S, and then even instant punch through once they got farther away. So there's definitely some concerns here. It's like, okay, is it a firmware issue? Is it, what's going on? Like we figured the 2 like center mass heads on the rear should perform better, and so he's actually working with Adaptiv now. Their customer support's been good with this. He's gonna be sending them out a replacement system, and he plans on doing like a retest with new CPU, new heads, new firmware, all that kind of stuff to see if it performs better. So again, one test, right, as always, but just trying to get as much data as we can as we do a bunch of different tests like this. So I guess we're gonna have to see like how it does with future testing. Now, lastly, we've got the Uniden R9. So this was with a set of triples. So 3 heads here in the front. The center head is configured to be like your transmitting head for the Dragon Eye. And on the rear, you had 2 regular, and then the center head is, again, kind of your transmitter against the Dragon Eye. And with the Unidens, here, I'll just let the results speak for themselves. Look at that. The Unidens did phenomenal. Almost jammed a gun, jam from gun from everything. There was just driver tail light for one of the Dragon Eye Compacts, where they got punch throughs at like 400 feet and 300 feet. But otherwise, like, this thing was bulletproof. And we actually tested a bunch of other cars, as I mentioned. Like, there were several people that showed up with jammers, including people who, like, with their rental cars, came into Florida, just took a set of, like, R9 jammers and just, like, slapped them onto the grills with double stick tape and went, and, like, they were getting similar results. I'll get into this once we get into the next video with, like, how it performs on other systems, but, like, honestly, these systems were kind of amazing. They were bulletproof, and like something that these test results don't show, like I mentioned, people just slap them on their car. With the ALPs, I'll get into this in the other video, but like there were a lot of people that were sitting on the side of the road, like going back to like fine-tune their heads, you know, the placement and getting things installed in the ideal spot, or making sure everything is straight and level and stuff. With the Unidens, they're just like slap them on and go, and the thing is awesome. So we're like, this thing seemed to be much less finicky in terms of placement and orientation and stuff compared to something like the ALP and the Escorts, which seem to be a little bit more finicky with like how the heads are placed and like where they're placed on the car. The Unidens just seem to do awesome. And yeah, I mean, look at this. It's almost all green. Like it did great. There's not much to say. And the Bravo saying, much like he's found in previous testing, the system performed really well. Only one of the guns was able to sneak some close-range punch-throughs at like extreme corner shots. Otherwise, it was solid. Previously, they did find that it didn't cover the Laser Atlanta stealth mode. I talked about it in the recent video with like firmware 1.26 for the R9. They actually did do an unofficial run that's not listed here with the Laser Atlanta and stealth mode, and it did great with this new firmware. Again, we were able to test it when we were down in Florida. So Uniden's been working on like, you know, supporting more guns, on UI stuff, on the way the JTK stuff works. And so I think there's still some improvements that need to be done on like the UI side. But in terms of performance, this system is like proving to be incredibly capable. Again, we've been seeing this on other vehicles as well, which I'll get into in like the next video. We also had a chance to talk with Uniden's engineers who were there on site of like, hey, you're going to be bringing this over to the R4 and the R8. And they're like, well, we really want to focus on leaving the jammers with the R9. There's also some concerns of like the way that you update the R9, you do it with a USB thumb drive, right? That's how you update the laser jammers. Well, if you plug those jammers into the R4 or the R8, there's actually no way to update the laser jammers. There's no USB port, and you can't do that over Bluetooth. Uniden doesn't have their own app. And so like if they were to add it to the R4 and the R8, there's currently no way to even update the laser jammers at all. So they're definitely working better on the R9 in that respect, but I would love to see this kind of stuff improve so we can actually plug it into the R4 and the R8. In fact, some of the people that I mentioned for their rental cars just like plugged it into an R4, and again, it's missing some features on like the UI side and stuff, but jamming wise, the system, as you can see, performs very well. And so either way, as far as these test results, a lot of these jammers actually did really well. There's nuances in terms of like head placement, and some of them had issues with like, okay, maybe the stingers needed to be pushed out farther. The TPXs, they had some issues potentially, so they need to retest. ALP, we got to retest with like TX blackheads and stuff. Like there's still more stuff to be done, but like I think we're at the point here where it's not just like ALP is the best and kind of only good viable option to jamming these Dragon Eyes. A lot of the other systems were pretty capable too. The Escorts are now performing way better than before. I think the Stinger has a lot of promise, especially with an optimal placement. The TMGs can perform well. The Adaptivs are good for the front. Maybe the rears, they struggle. The Unidens performed amazing. And so kind of what we're seeing is like, yes, there's definitely still differences and nuance in terms of UI and features and head installation and stuff, but we're getting to the point now where like, there's a lot of really good jammers that can jam even some of the toughest guns that is out there, which is awesome to see. So that starts to open up other possibilities for other laser jammers as well. As I've alluded to in previous videos, like the gap is kind of starting to close between the ALP and other laser jammers. Yes, the ALP I still think is the best jammer despite what we saw in this test. Again, there's more testing that I want to share with you guys. I still think it's the best laser jammer, but a lot of the other jammers are really starting to close that gap, and they have some advantages that the ALP doesn't have, and so in certain situations you may actually prefer something other than the ALP. I'll get into all that stuff in future videos, but these are just kind of my thoughts of like, we now have a lot of systems that are very capable. Installation matters, placement matters, firmware update matters, head orientation matters, having the latest equipment matters, all that stuff obviously still matters. But that kind of the biggest takeaway is like, there's a lot of systems now that are starting to become quite capable, and so things in that respect I think are pretty exciting. So thank you to everybody who's been helping with testing, with shooting the guns and logging the results and getting this stuff posted and coming out to the event and helping make this event happen. Like, only could happen because there were a lot of people who were doing an awesome job with really helping. So with that said, I'll link to this full discussion here on the forums. I would definitely recommend also just heading over to this thread. There's a lot of additional follow-up and discussion that's really good. So if you're curious, you want to learn more, head on over to this thread here on the forums. If you want to pick up any of the jammers that I talked about, I'll link to all of them down in the description below. So with that said, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.